When Christ was telling his disciples about the events that would take place before his return and the end of the age, he also mentioned after his return that there would be this wedding banquet. The wedding banquet most likely is connected to the final fall feast of ingathering in the Jewish Old Testament, and most likely the Feast of Tabernacles. But he referred to this wedding banquet, this wedding feast that he would have with his church, his followers, at his return. This presentation is entitled Christ's Wedding Banquet, Where? Where seems to be the question in some people's minds. When Christ returns for his church, a wedding feast or a wedding banquet will take place. Men have been teaching in the last 180, 190 years that this banquet will take place in heaven because they see Christ coming back, rapturing his church, and returning to heaven for the wedding banquet. But does the Bible really say that's where the wedding banquet is held? Let's look at some scripture about this wedding banquet or wedding feast to see what we can find out about it and where it will be held. Christ in this parable said he sent his servants to those who had been invited, but they refused to come. He said, "Tell those invited, I have prepared my dinner. My fatted cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." Well, the fatted cattle have been butchered and everything is ready. This sounds earthly rather than heavenly, but that's not conclusive. Here's the passage from the parable of the 10 virgins. The bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet. The door was shut. Later the others also came. "Sir, sir," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "I tell you the truth, I don't know you." So the ones that were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet and they celebrated the feast. But the ones that weren't ready didn't go in. In each of these passages about the wedding banquet, Christ seems to be expecting his followers to be ready and waiting. Here he says, "Be ready for service and keep your lamps burning, like men waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet. So when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him." Again, they must be ready. When he knocks, they must do something. They must open the door and go into the wedding banquet. Now here's an Old Testament prophecy about this feast. Yahweh Almighty will reign on Mount Zion. That's in Jerusalem. On this mountain the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich foods for all people, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain he will swallow up death forever. This is on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. This feast is held on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. And he also says, "Death is swallowed up forever," which is a passage that Paul used when he was describing the resurrection of the dead and the rapture of the living in 1 Corinthians 15, 53, 54, 55. Again, the resurrection occurs at this time. The feast occurs on Mount Zion. So if we examine the scripture about this wedding banquet and wedding feast, we should be seeing that it seems to be an earthly feast when Christ gathers all his followers at the resurrection for the final feast of ingathering, as we see from the Jewish Testament. But it doesn't fit with a pre-trib rapture where they say Christ comes, gathers his own, and has a wedding banquet in heaven. This wedding banquet is on Mount Zion in Jerusalem.